Trump promises the moon, but there is no word yet on the rocket. And that could be a real issue for him. Even Trump supporters, quote, feared that by overinflating what he can accomplish, he could undermine his position. Meanwhile, we also found out more about how the Trump administration dealt with investigations into leaks of classified information the first time he was in office. A new report from the Justice Department's internal watchdog shows that Donald Trump's Department of Justice secretly obtained phone and text records of 43 congressional staffers and 2 members of Congress. With that, let's get smarter with the help of our leadoff panel this evening. Jeff Mason is here with me at 30 Rock, White House correspondent for Reuters. Kara Lennig joins us, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter for The Washington Post, and former Republican Congressman David Jolly of Florida. Jeff, you get the home court advantage. Let's talk about President Biden's speech, because it seemed to be all about pointing out the good his administration does to lead our economy through our COVID recovery, and really the warnings of what the Trump plans could actually do. What was your takeaway?
My takeaway is that he's in legacy mode. He wants to talk about his legacy, understandably. He's on the way out in the next month. It's
probably
going
fight
fast
to get people to remember it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I would say about that is these are the points that he made today, including the warnings about his successor, as well as the things that he's proud of, are not new. I mean, these are things that he talked about when he was a candidate. They are things that Vice President Harris talked about when she was the Democratic candidate. The warnings did not succeed in terms of turning people more positive about the economy or more negative about the proposals that President-elect Trump put out on the campaign trail.
Mr. Jolly, President Biden pointed out that while the Trump administration talked about Infrastructure Week for 4 years, I think they had, Jeff will know better than me, it was like 8 infrastructure weeks, maybe 11 of them. Joe Biden actually got the legislation passed, but like most infrastructure projects, they will not start or definitely not get completed while Joe Biden is president. Most of this is going to happen while Republicans are in power. And Democrats want to get themselves credit for it. But isn't this sort of the unfortunate problem with getting infrastructure passed? You can't get credit for the work that you actually did.
Sure. And the unfortunate problem of inheriting a pandemic economy and the long road it takes to get out of that. I love seeing Joe Biden do this, and I think the long lens of history will remember his economic record fairly well. 70 more people went to work today than ever before. Inflation has come down. Real wages have gone up. The stock market has broken all-time records, more participation in 401ks than ever before. Investments and access to health care, to home ownership, and yes, to infrastructure has occurred under this administration in ways that never occurred under the previous administration. And so Joe Biden is reminding voters, but he's also reminding history of a very strong record. And I think his message to Donald Trump and to Republicans is slow and steady wins the race here. We are not that long away from a post-pandemic, very fragile economy. It is in a good place. If you rattle the domestic or world economy right now with tariffs or tax cuts, or just in the effort to get money moving, you act too aggressively, we're driving on ice right now, but Joe Biden has us going straight. That's the warning for Donald Trump. We just know that Donald Trump is going to come in and try to wreck things quickly to claim ownership and claim success.
Carol, what the current president hasn't been able to get is credit for all that he's done. He did say that he regretted not signing his name, putting his name on COVID relief checks like Donald Trump did. What does that say about these two leaders and sort of where they are now, where they've been, who they are?
Well, I mean, Steph, Joe Biden faced the most humiliating defeat. He was basically driven off the ticket by his own party leaders who said there's no chance of you winning. We at least have a chance with Kamala Harris winning. And so it's absolutely legacy mode, as Jeff points out. He wants to put on the record the things that he has achieved. And he's not wrong, right? 16 million jobs created while he was president, one of the lowest average unemployment rates of any president in half a century, I think, are the statistics there. he is, I think, coming to this realization ever since he left that ticket, and ever since, and even more dramatically since it failed, that he's got to tell people what he did for history. And Donald Trump did a much better job of controlling that megaphone than Joe Biden did. Joe Biden was, you know, for better or for worse, a traditional Democratic politician playing by some rules that were stated back somewhere in the 1990s, maybe even the 1970s. And Donald Trump was playing by a completely different rule book in which facts really didn't matter, hewing to reality didn't matter. And Joe Biden is trying to grab that megaphone for these last few minutes that he has it.
Well, let's talk about that rule book, because conventional wisdom, Jeff, has always been under promise and over deliver. Donald Trump goes with the reverse. Does he run the risk with these huge promises that he won't be able to fulfill them and he'll disappoint his base? Or if he doesn't, he'll simply say, not my fault, I tried, blame this guy, that guy?
First question, for sure, he runs the risk of not being able to fulfill these promises, because they are, as Peter Baker wrote, shooting for the moon, and some of them are just completely unrealistic. Political logic would say that yes, at some point.
Human logic.
Human, indeed. Logic, generally, would suggest that at some point he would get punished politically for not being able to fulfill those promises. But we all know, having covered President Trump since his first term and now going into the second, that kind of logic doesn't apply in most cases to his base. So I think that he will come up with reasons why he didn't fulfill the promises that he made, and he's not running for re-election again. He's not allowed to, and he'll go out, and anything that does go wrong, or pieces of the wall that don't get built, or whatever it is, he'll blame on someone else.
But Dave, that's the thing. Donald Trump has now won 2 elections by making giant promises with no explanation of how he'll accomplish them. And if the last administration is an example, not just a promise, he won't.
I think there's 2 strategies here. He's a salesman, so he will sell you the results, even if they're bad results, as though he won. He's not just selling the product, he's selling you on the back end that you feel better, or he just outright lies to you. Truthful hyperbole, as was written in The Art of the Deal. But I think the other challenge with Donald Trump, and this is tough to cover as well, sometimes he succeeds by breaking the rules. Right? He might bring an end to the Russia-Ukraine conflict by surrendering to Vladimir Putin. That's not the way a normal president would act. He might actually help stimulate the economy by taking very bad long-term fiscal decisions. He might, as we've discussed before, Stephanie, try to break the independence of the Fed, which would be against the norms of the presidency. So there may be some short-term relief, some short-term wins that he declares as historic wins, but what they've actually done is undone the powers of the presidency in ways that history hasn't seen before.
All right, Carol, let's talk about this report, because I want our audience to understand what it is. Donald Trump's Department of Justice was trying to find out where the leaks were coming from. And in this effort, they wound up getting the phone logs of congresspeople and reporters covering the White House, even Kash Patel, who could be the incoming FBI director. What do we need to know about this? This seems highly unusual.
So, Steph, we knew for some time that Trump's DOJ obtained records, phone records, not the actual contents, but like basically the metadata that tells you who's communicating with who, for reporters at the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, as well as members of Congress and staffers of Congress. We didn't realize how many congressional staffers were swooped up in this gathering of email and phone records. But what's important, at least as I read it in the Inspector General's report, is this finding that there were no laws that anybody broke in gathering these records. They bypassed the policies of the Department of Justice. There were rules about how high you had to go up to get permission to gather the records of reporters, including 2 or 3 of my colleagues at the time who wrote about conversations that Michael Flynn was having with Russian diplomat Kislyak, Ambassador Kislyak. they were blowing through the guidance, the policy, but that didn't matter. There was nothing really stopping them from doing this. And the huge reminder that we all should be keeping at front of brain is that Donald Trump's appointees and Donald Trump himself have said they are going to prosecute everybody who investigated Donald Trump over the course of his time in office and after he left office. And so they're going to prosecute the prosecutors, prosecute the investigators. And Kash Patel has said he's going to go after lots of people, including reporters. So does anyone think they are going to be following the guidance of the Department of Justice and the long-held policies that urge caution in looking into how reporters gather their information through no subpoena, but just collection of their phone records, and this separation of powers issue of looking into Congress and congressional staffers? Do we think they're actually going to adhere to any of those policies?
But Jeff, go after reporters for what? Doing their jobs?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same question with regard to going after people who were on the January 6th committee. What kind of legal action are you going to take against lawmakers who were acting in their official capacity as lawmakers, and ditto for reporters?
David Jolly, what is your take? I mean, you're a former congressperson. When you hear this, it has to send a chill down your spine.
Yeah, look, I think there's some cover because they were trying to get the leaker. At some point, they thought it was James Comey or others. So maybe some of these members of the press or Congress were on the receiving side. That still doesn't change the fact that they violated department policy, as Carol said. I don't think there's any surprise that Bill Barr's department violated that policy. The question is, would Pam Bondi's department now violate the policy, or would Kash Patel encourage violating the process?
Dave, isn't the issue if you can, I want to make sure I say this right, because I feel like in the last administration, we were living in like unprecedented nation. If the only crime is violating policy, they're not going to care. It's just about violating the law. Well, they would say policy schmalicy means nothing to me.
Yeah, well, and I think when it comes to Congress, there's some constitutional questions as well about what flows from the speech and debate clause. But set that aside, I think your question is so important because in the normal world, we would think that some level of shame or disclosure by this IG report would bring a change of a department and a realization we need to be more conservative in how we handle this. That's not Trump 2.0, and that's probably not Pam Bondi's department either. So we should expect them to be more aggressive. And on the press, I think during these 4 years, they will actually pass legislation through Congress, and the president will sign legislation regarding the press that ultimately tests New York Times v. Sullivan. We've seen this in conservative states where they've tried to change the rules protecting the press, particularly in the case of the use of anonymous sources under statutory law now may be presumed false. A use of an anonymous source could be presumed false when it comes to litigation. That would be a significant shift and chill when it comes to the press. I don't only think we're going to see the administration change behavior and get more aggressive. I think we're going to see Congress play with legislation that ultimately ends up before a Supreme Court testing New York Times v. Sullivan.
Okay, well, then I'm going to make it easy for them. If the future president is watching, if he's wondering during the last administration who the anonymous sources were, I'm actually going to speak for Carol, Jeff, and myself, who all cover the White House. It was almost everybody. Jeff, Carol, David, thank you so much. When we return.